All right, welcome to another deep dive. Buckle up because today we're gonna explore something a little spicy.
Indeed.
You guys have sent in three hypnosis audio tracks, and they're all about inducing hands-free orgasms. So let's take a deep dive into those together.
Sounds like a fascinating area to explore. We'll be unpacking not just the techniques these tracks use, but also, the psychology behind those techniques and how effective they really are.
I gotta say, I'm already blushing just thinking about this deep dive, but I'm also super curious. We've got Hypnosis Hands-Free Orgasm 1, Hypnosis Hands-Free Orgasm 2, and Hypnosis for Longer and Stronger Orgasms. So just to start, can you give us a quick overview? Like, what are the common threads running through all three?
Well, you'll notice that each track follows a pretty classic hypnotic structure. So first, they guide you into a very relaxed state, using deep breathing and muscle relaxation techniques, similar to what you might find in like a meditation app.
Okay, so far so good. But I'm guessing the goals are a little different than your average meditation session.
Of course, once that nice relaxed state is established, the tracks use various deepening techniques, and these often involve, counting down or maybe imagery of like sinking or descending. And in some cases, they even use finger snaps.
Finger snap.
Finger snaps, yeah, all associated with entering a deeper trance.
That finger snapping thing is intriguing to me.
Yeah.
And maybe even a little creepy, especially in track one, where it seems like they're like directly linking the snaps to waves of arousal, like snap and bam, you're turned on.
Yeah, that's a really great observation. And it really highlights the power of suggestion in hypnosis. The hypnotist is basically planting the idea that the snap is a trigger for arousal. And then the listener's subconscious mind, it starts to form that association.
So it's not about like mind control,
Yeah.
but it's more about tapping into the subconscious. That's
Sure.
reassuring, but still mind blowing at the same time.
Yeah, and the effectiveness of this, it really varies from person to person. Not everyone is equally susceptible to these hypnotic suggestions.
That makes sense. It's like some people are more ticklish than others, so some might just feel super relaxed while listening to these tracks, but nothing more.
Precisely. It's important to remember that hypnosis is a tool. And just like any tool, the effectiveness depends on the user and, the context. These tracks are designed to tap into that power of suggestion, but, they don't have any like magical ability to force anyone into anything.
Okay, good to know. So we've got relaxation, we've got these deepening techniques, we've got finger snaps. What comes next?
Well, that's where the real magic happens. That's when they get to the suggestion and visualization. Each track uses very vivid descriptions of physical sensations and emotional responses. And, these are all associated with arousal and orgasm. Essentially, they're painting this detailed mental picture, and it's designed to, really draw the listener in.
Okay, so they're setting the scene, so to speak. And this is where each track starts to take its own kind of unique approach, right?
Yes, absolutely. For example, track one that focuses on this rapid escalation of sensations, and it builds up to a climax through that whole finger snapping technique we were talking about.
Yeah.
It emphasizes the feeling of the whole experience being like incredibly real.
Track one already sounds like a wild ride. What about track two? How does it differ?
Track two takes a very different approach. Track two builds suspense through, kind of a narrative scenario where the listener is tied, spread eagle, and, it's playing with themes of helplessness and arousal.
Whoa, that sounds intense. It's interesting how they've incorporated like a narrative element, into the hypnotic suggestions. It almost feels like they're creating this guided erotic fantasy.
Exactly. Like a great example of how hypnosis can weave together, psychological triggers, physical sensations, and vivid storytelling.
Then we have track three, which seems to take a more like interactive approach.
Right. Yeah. Track three, it starts by encouraging you to pause the recording, get comfortable, and, they even suggest that you might want to be clothing optional.
Yeah.
It really emphasizes, the listener's agency. Like you can choose your level of pleasure and let the sensations get as intense as you desire.
It almost feels like, choose your own adventure for orgasms. I'm noticing a trend here.
Mm.
Each track seems to target like a different psychological approach to arousal. Do you think that's intentional?
It's definitely something to consider. Each track seems to be playing with these different fantasies and power dynamics and, different levels of control, which could explain why some people might find one track more effective or appealing than another.
That's a really interesting observation. I'm starting to understand the deeper layers at play here, and I'm sure listeners are too. But before we dive into each track, I think it's important to, address the elephant in the room.
Ah, yes, the ethical considerations.
Exactly. We're talking about hypnosis, we're talking about sexuality, two areas that can be pretty sensitive.
You're absolutely right. It's important to remember that hypnosis is not mind control. It's a state of heightened suggestibility, but it can't force you to do anything against your will.
So it's more about like tapping into existing desires and amplifying them.
Exactly. It's about exploring your own, inner landscape in a safe and controlled environment. But it's crucial to be critical and informed. Don't just take these recordings at face value. Do your own research, understand the potential benefits and limitations.
Good point. These tracks aren't a replacement for, professional help if someone's experiencing serious sexual issues. It's important to seek guidance from a qualified therapist or a medical professional in those cases.
Absolutely. These recordings are best viewed as, a form of erotic entertainment, like a way to explore fantasies and sensations. They're not designed to be a, therapeutic tool.
It makes sense. It's like anything else. It's important to use these tools responsibly and with awareness of their potential effects.
Precisely. And on that note, are you ready to dive into the unique aspects of each track in more detail?
Oh, I'm definitely ready to get into the nitty-gritty and maybe a little hot under the collar. But first, I think it's important to give our listeners a moment to catch their breath. We've covered a lot of ground already, and there's much more to explore. We'll be back in just a moment to continue our deep dive into the world of hands-free orgasms through hypnosis.
Welcome back. So let's delve deeper into, the specifics of each track.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in like the language and the imagery they use because I imagine the way these suggestions are delivered plays, a huge role in how effective they are.
You're absolutely right. It's not just about the words themselves. It's about the tone, the pacing, the way the hypnotist crafts these verbal landscapes, basically, to evoke specific sensations and emotions.
Okay, so let's revisit track one. What were some of the key phrases or techniques that jumped out at you?
Well, track one, there's this heavy emphasis on the sensations being, so real, so intense. It's almost as if they're trying to like override any potential skepticism and lead the listener to, just fully accept the experience as genuine.
Like they're saying, don't even try to resist it, just surrender to these sensations.
Exactly. And the repetition of those phrases, it reinforces that suggestion, like embedding it deeper into the listener's subconscious.
And let's not forget about those finger snaps. It's almost like they're like conditioning the listener, to respond to that specific trigger. Like each snap is followed by another wave of suggested arousal.
Yeah, it's a fascinating example of anchoring a suggestion to a physical cue.
Mm.
It's kind of similar to how Pavlov conditioned his dogs to salivate at the sound of a bell.
Wow, it makes you wonder if after listening to this track repeatedly, you might start responding to finger snaps in everyday life.
Now, that's an interesting thought experiment. But let's move on to track two. And track two takes a very different approach. Instead of that rapid escalation of sensations, it focuses more on like building suspense and playing out a very specific scenario.
Right, the whole being tied spread eagle theme,
Yeah.
that's quite a departure from the, more direct approach of track one. What kind of language do they use to create that sense of helplessness and arousal?
Well, they use a lot of vivid imagery. They're describing the ropes tightening, the pressure against the skin, the feeling of being, completely restrained. But they deliver these suggestions with this mix of authority and seduction, which creates a really complex power dynamic.
It's like they're saying, you might be helpless, but you're going to enjoy every minute of it.
Yes, it's this fascinating blend of dominance and pleasure. And by weaving those suggestions into a narrative, they're essentially guiding the listener through like this guided erotic fantasy.
It makes me wonder if this approach taps into, a specific psychological desire for surrender or like a loss of control, in a safe and controlled environment.
That's a great point. It certainly raises some interesting questions about, the psychology behind these kinds of fantasies.
Now, track three seems to be all about empowering the listener and giving them a sense of agency. It's almost like the opposite of track two in that regard.
Absolutely. From the very beginning, track three emphasizes, your comfort. It encourages you to like pause the recording, get comfortable.
Yeah.
And they even suggest you might want to be clothing optional. It's all about setting the stage for, this personalized experience.
I love that they're like giving the listener permission to explore their own pleasure at their own pace. It feels much more collaborative than the other tracks.
Yeah, and instead of using like commands or those finger snaps, they use more, suggestive language, encouraging you to allow yourself to feel, to let the sensations flow, to choose your level of pleasure.
It's like they're providing the tools and the guidance, but ultimately, it's up to you to create the experience you desire. It's a much more empowering approach, I think.
Exactly. And it highlights the fact that, hypnosis isn't about surrendering your will,
Mhm.
but rather, it's about tapping into the power of your own mind to, create the experiences you desire.
It's fascinating how each track utilizes language and imagery in such distinct ways to achieve, like, a similar goal.
It really showcases the versatility of hypnosis,
Yeah.
and the nuanced understanding of the human psyche that goes into crafting these kinds of suggestions.
So if our listeners are, considering trying out these hypnosis tracks, what are some key things they should keep in mind?
Well, first and foremost, it's essential to approach it with an open mind and a sense of curiosity,
Yeah.
but also remember that you're in control. If anything feels uncomfortable or off-putting, just stop the recording. You don't have to follow along with anything that doesn't feel, right for you.
Absolutely. Your comfort and your well-being are, paramount. It's also important to remember that these tracks are not a replacement for, professional help. If you're experiencing any serious sexual issues, if that's the case, seeking guidance from a qualified therapist or medical professional is crucial.
Precisely. These tracks are designed to be, a form of erotic entertainment,
Yeah.
a way to explore fantasies and sensations in a safe space. They're not a solution for any, underlying problems, but rather they can be a potential complement to a healthy and fulfilling, sexual life.
That's a really important point. It's like with anything else, moderation and self-awareness are key.
Exactly. And remember, while these tracks can, provide a unique and potentially pleasurable experience, the true power lies within your own mind. Your imagination is the ultimate source of your pleasure and satisfaction.
That's a great reminder. So we've covered the basic techniques, the unique aspects of each track, and some important ethical considerations. I feel like we've given our listeners a lot to think about.
Indeed, we have. But before we conclude this deep dive, I think it's worth highlighting one more, fascinating aspect of these recordings.
Oh, I'm intrigued. What else have you noticed?
Well, we've talked a lot about the power of suggestion, but what about the power of the listener's own, beliefs and expectations?
That's an interesting angle. Are you suggesting that someone's, pre-existing beliefs about hypnosis or sexuality, might influence their experience with these tracks?
Exactly. If you, go into it believing that hypnosis is this powerful tool for transformation, you might be more likely to experience, profound effects. Conversely, if you're, skeptical or have reservations, you might find that the tracks have, little to no impact on you.
So it's not just about the techniques themselves, but also about the mindset and the beliefs that the listener brings to the experience.
Precisely. And that highlights, the interconnectedness of mind and body and the fascinating ways in which, our beliefs can shape our realities.
It makes you wonder if those who are, already comfortable exploring their sexuality and have, positive associations with pleasure might be more receptive to these kinds of suggestions.
That's a great point. It suggests that these tracks might not be a one-size-fits-all solution.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the, a complex interplay between like psychology, suggestion, and sexuality.
Indeed. It's a reminder that there's always more to learn and explore when it comes to the human mind and its incredible potential.
I think we've given our listeners plenty to ponder. But before we wrap up completely, I think it's important to address, one final and perhaps the most important question.
And what would that be?
Well, we've explored the techniques, the psychology, the ethics, but ultimately the question on everyone's mind is, do these tracks actually work?
Ah, yes. The million-dollar question. And unfortunately, there's no, easy answer. It's difficult to measure the effectiveness of these types of, interventions as subjective experiences vary greatly.
So there's no scientific consensus on whether or not hands-free orgasms through hypnosis are like a real phenomenon.
Not exactly. While anecdotal evidence suggests that some people, do experience, powerful results, There's limited scientific research in this area.
It seems like there's a lot we still don't know about the interplay between, hypnosis, suggestion, and sexual response.
Absolutely, and that's part of what makes, this topic so fascinating. It invites us to question our assumptions, to explore the mysteries of the human mind, and consider, the vast possibilities of pleasure and experience.
Sounds like we've reached the end of our deep dive.
Indeed, but perhaps this is just the beginning of a new journey of exploration for our listeners.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of hands-free orgasms through hypnosis. We've covered a lot. The techniques, the psychology, even the ethical considerations surrounding these audio tracks.
It has been quite a journey. We've delved into the power of suggestion, the role of visualization, even the impact of individual beliefs and expectations.
This has been one of our most stimulating deep dives yet. I'm sure our listeners are feeling just as intrigued, maybe even a little flustered by all this information.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, one that, often sparks a lot of curiosity, a bit of skepticism.
Oh.
But that's part of what makes it so compelling. It challenges us to think differently about, sexuality, pleasure, and the untapped potential of our own minds.
So as we wrap up this exploration, what are the key takeaways, that you hope our listeners will walk away with?
Well, I think the most important thing is to approach this topic with, a healthy dose of curiosity and critical thinking. Don't just accept everything you hear. Question your assumptions, explore different perspectives, and form your own conclusions.
It's about being an empowered listener,
Yeah.
taking in the information, processing it, and then, deciding what resonates.
Exactly. And remember, these audio tracks are just one tool, in a vast landscape of possibilities when it comes to exploring pleasure and sexuality.
Mm.
They're not, a magic bullet, and they're not for everyone. But they can be a fascinating and potentially enjoyable way to explore, the power of your own mind.
So if our listeners are, curious and want to try out these tracks, what advice would you give them?
First and foremost, prioritize your comfort and safety. Choose recordings from, reputable sources. Listen to your intuition. And never feel pressured to continue if something feels uncomfortable or wrong. You're always in control of your own experience.
It's like, with any new experience, start slow, listen to your body, and trust your instincts.
Precisely. And remember, these tracks are designed to be, a form of entertainment, a way to explore fantasies and sensations in a safe space. They're not a substitute for addressing any underlying, sexual issues.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't replace, genuine intimacy and connection with a partner.
It's about, finding what works for you, adding to your toolkit of pleasure and exploration. But ultimately, the true power lies within your own imagination and the unique ways, you experience and create pleasure.
Well said. And perhaps that's the most profound takeaway from this deep dive. Whether you choose to explore hypnosis or not, your own mind is the most powerful tool you have when it comes to sexuality and pleasure.
It's about, embracing your curiosity, exploring your desires, and discovering those infinite possibilities within yourself.
Exactly. On that note, I think it's time for us to sign off. It's been a pleasure, exploring this fascinating topic with you and our listeners.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of hands-free orgasms through hypnosis. We hope you've, learned something new, sparked your curiosity, and maybe even discovered a new avenue for exploration.
Until next time.
Keep diving deep.